for today is chapter 18. And I'm very glad to be subbing for you again. But chapter 17 and 18 are awfully intertwined. And Joel has encouraged me that if we need to go back and review some things, we can do that. But we're going to start in chapter 18, which is my official assignment. And then we'll see how it plays back on what was covered last week. So I'm going to be reading to you from the text of the New American Standard Version. I like it because the 1995 update is better, but it allows me to almost translate on the fly from the English. So let's see, how do I show you that one? Don't do that. I think if I just exit that. Oh, got it. After these things, we'll read through the whole chapter first. After these things, I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was illumined by his glory. And he cried out with a mighty voice, saying, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She's become a dwelling place of demons, and a prison of every unclean spirit, and a prison of every unclean and hateful bird. For all the nations have drunk of the wine of the passion of her immorality, and the kings of the earth have committed immorality with her, and the merchants of the earth have become rich by the wealth of her sensuality." I heard another voice from heaven saying, "Come out of her, my people, so that you won't participate in her sins and receive of her plagues. For her sins have piled up as high as heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. Pay her back even as she has paid, and give back double according to her deeds. In the cup which she has mix twice as much for her, to the degree that she glorified herself and lived sensually, to the same degree give her torment and mourning. For she says in her heart, I sit a queen, and I'm not a widow, and I'll never see mourning. For this reason, in one day her plagues will come, pestilence and mourning and famine, and she'll be burned up with fire. For the Lord God who judges her is strong. And the kings of the earth, who committed immorality and lived sensuously with her, will weep and lament over her when they see the smoke of her burning, standing at a distance because of the fear of her torment, saying, Woe, woe, the great city, Babylon, the strong city, for in 1 hour your judgments come. And the merchants of the earth weep and mourn over her, because no one buys their cargoes anymore, cargoes of gold and silver, and precious stones and pearls and fine linen and purple and silk and scarlet, and every citron wood and every article of ivory and every article from very costly wood and bronze and iron and marble and cinnamon and spice and everything nice. That's not what it says. And incense and perfume and frankincense and wine and olive oil and fine flour and wheat and cattle and sheep and of horses and chariots and slaves and human lives. The fruit you long for has gone from you. And all things that were luxurious and splendid have passed away from you, and will no longer find them. The merchants of these things who became rich from her will stand at a distance because of the fear of her torment, weeping and mourning, saying, Woe, woe, the great city, she who is clothed in fine linen and purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, for in 1 hour such great wealth has been laid waste. And every shipmaster and every passenger and sailor, and as many as make their living by the sea, stood at a distance and were crying out as they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, What's like the great city? And they threw dust on their heads and were crying out, weeping and mourning, saying, Woe, Woe, the great city, in which all who had ships at sea became rich by her wealth, for in 1 hour she's been laid waste. Rejoice over her, O heaven, and you saints and apostles and prophets, because God has pronounced judgment for you against her. Then a strong angel took up a stone like a great millstone and threw it into the sea, saying, so will Babylon, the great sea, be thrown down with violence, and will not be found any longer. And the sound of harpists and musicians and flute players and trumpeters will not be heard in you any longer. And no craftsman of any craft will be found in you any longer. And the sound of a mill will not be heard in you any longer. And the light of a lamp will not shine in you any longer. And the voice of the bridegroom and the bride won't be heard in you any longer. For your merchants were the great men of the earth, because all the nations were deceived by your sorcery. And in her was found the blood of prophets and of saints and of all who have been slain on the earth. As you hear it, you can hear the pattern, the cycle, right? There's probably a moment where you're thinking, wait, didn't we read this part already? And the answer is kind of yes, in a sense. It's a twofold song that repeats with just a little variation. And so just to give you some context, let's look back at our little progress chart here. This is where we are right now. This is these top, ignore the bottom row, right? This is the first vision that John really gets shown. That's the first part of Revelation. It goes all the way through chapter 14. And then starting in chapter 15, right, John essentially brings up episode 2. And the whole thing, the whole cycle of vision starts over for a second go-round. And there's a lot of commonality with visual differences, right? If there's one thing, if there's a real way that you're supposed to read Revelation, part of the fundamental nature of that is asking the question, man, what must have that been like to see? What must have that been like to hear? Because that is John's entire experience that he is trying to convey in the letter. It was like gold. It was like many waters. It was like trumpets. And it's hard to do because he's been shown time from heaven. And that's like a break your brain kind of experience. But he does a fantastic job, but God shows him the same thing in 2 different series of visions. And then there is the 7th one. We just couldn't fit it. But the 7th one is a final judgment. Oh, no, down here at the end, there's the 7th final judgment that comes at the end of the repeated cycle. So, let's look at this verse by verse, and I'll add in some notes, okay? When it says another angel, right, the last thing that John saw was 7 different angels that all had these bowls, right? Bowls, very much like incense censers. And the angels are each taking a turn, pouring out the things that they have in their bowls. That series of action has been completed now. And the things that came out of those bowls were not pleasant. But now he sees another angel apart from any of those 7, coming down from heaven, having great authority. And he's so big. And now, mind you, in the Bible, there is no such thing as the view brought to you by NASA, okay? Genesis 1, Revelation 18, it doesn't matter. The viewshed of the Bible is terrestrial. When you're reading Genesis 1 or anything about the earth, John never got to see the pictures from the Hubble, Okay? John never got to see the pictures from the moon landing. Everything that he sees is from as if you were standing on the earth and seeing it happen. And that, again, that's true for Genesis 1 as well. Okay? But, in any case, as the angel approaches down from heaven, all the earth that John can see in this vision is lit up. It's almost like the angel is functioning like the sun, okay? And he cried out with a mighty voice, saying, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great." And we have seen this before. I'm going to need to hop out of my full screen. There's going to be lots of tabs today, folks. We've seen these exact words before in Revelation 14, verse 8, right? This is because 14 fits in the first cycle. So this is one of those repeated moments. And another angel, a second one followed saying, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She who has made all the nations drink of the wine of the passion of her immorality." Here we have, she has become a dwelling place of demons and a prison of every unclean spirit and a prison of every unclean and hateful bird. John knows from personal experience, right, that some birds are just terrible, right? But for all the nations have drunk the wine of the passion of her immorality. So it is a repetition, but there are additional details. Babylon's fate as the dwelling place of unclean animals is what it is here. He's judging the animals that are showing up based on the ethics of the law of Moses, by which he also lived, right, as a Jewish person. Babylon's fate as a dwelling place of unclean animals recalls the prophecy concerning Babylon in Isaiah 13, verses 21 and 22. And this was Isaiah, although Isaiah predominantly was God's messenger in the time of the Assyrian invasion, long before Babylonia was an actual regional superpower, Isaiah did predict prophecies against Babylon for things that politically would not happen until well after his day was over. And this was one of the things he said about Babylon. "But desert creatures will lie down there, and their houses will be full of owls. Ostriches will also live there, and shaggy goats will frolic there. Hyenas will howl in their fortified towers, and jackals in their luxurious palaces. Her time also will soon come, and her days will not be prolonged." However, this verse that we get here in verse 2 of Revelation 18 contains a much bolder metaphor that's obscured by some translations. The NASB 1995 update does a good job, but the ESV, the NIV, and some others actually translate it as haunt. Kind of gives, that seedy image of where unsavory things just hang around. But the text actually means, the word in Greek means technically a place of guard. And context determines whether it is a place of guard to keep bad things out or a place of guard to keep bad things in. A fortress or a prison. The word can actually be used either way. And there are moments in the Bible where it's just, you have to consider that the biblical writer himself may have not wanted to make you pick. This one says prison, but it's possible that both meanings are intended. Evil things might well refer to their prison as a fortress. And that's just the nature of evil. And in verse 3, "For all the nations have drunk of the wine of the passion of her immorality, and the kings of the earth have committed acts of immorality with her, and the merchants of the earth have become rich by the wealth of her sensuality." This repeats the same metaphor for Babylon's sin in almost the same words as Revelation 14:8 again. And so again, we see the cycle repeating, and we'll hop over to verse 4 and 5, but I just want to take a moment. It's hard for somebody who would have been steeped in the work of Jesus, like John was, like the first apostolic audiences were. The New Testament, it took some time to form. The things that people really latched onto, that the apostles conveyed of first importance beyond their own letters, right, were the teachings of Jesus. Merchants figure several times in the teachings of Jesus. And merchants were, nowadays, we're surrounded by merchants in a different way. They don't all just bring their stuff on carts and show up in the public square, right, or at the port. They kind of came to us and laid foundations and got zoning permits, right? But in the ancient world, the merchants show up and they have all of their wares, and they're all pictured as being in love with this particular entity, this particular being. And what is one of the ways that Jesus depicted merchants? Remember that sweet, sweet parable about a merchant who comes to town and he finds one pearl that is just more precious than anything else he's ever seen in his days. He just sells everything that he's got on his back to sell to have that one thing. This is the opposite of that, right? This is the opposite of that sweetness that Jesus conveyed about the nature of the gospel, the nature of the kingdom of heaven. This is not the kingdom of heaven. This is what in John's day is in competition with the kingdom of heaven. And it is sad. Yes.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about, because what you're talking about kind of reminds me of James, in the book of James, where he says, it's talking about the people that go from, hey, we're going to go to this city or that city, we're going to make a bunch of money, and we're going to get rich quick,
Yes.
Is that kind of like what you're talking about
Well,
here?
I mean, it's all, the New Testament is actually written to the daily life of the first century, right? And so mercantilism is not just a literary feature of the New Testament. It is actually part of life. And it's one of the ways in which humans have always been able to do the wrong thing, is with the economy. It just so happens that economic power is one of the ways in which this Babylon has stolen the hearts of the people of the earth in a legitimately competitive way to the gospel. And this should not surprise us, right? Jesus warned, where your treasure is, there your heart will be. It's like they're attached on a string, and wherever you put your money, imagine if you cast out your fishing pole, and wherever the hook landed, the pole just leapt out of your hands and followed it, right? You don't get to be in control of where treasure takes you. Where you put your treasure, your heart will follow. This happened in John's day just as much as it happens in ours. And he calls it is presented to him in terms of one of the greatest enemies in the cultural memory of the Jewish people. It is ruinous to be in love with the present world. And John was witness to a major episode of that ruin in human and Christian history. I heard another voice from heaven, verses 4 and 5. I won't read it all twice, but in verses 4 and 5, verse 17 ends, chapter 17 ends with a passage quoting Jeremiah 51:7, which is here. Babylon has been a golden cup in the hand of Yahweh, intoxicating all the earth. The nations have drunk her wine, therefore the nations are going mad. This was about, in Jeremiah's day, that's like the literal Babylon, right? It's not a metaphor for anything. It's the major kingdom north of the Persian Gulf who has kind of taken over the world in the Iron Age too. But in verse 9, verses 4 and 5 of our chapter today come from verse 9 of Jeremiah 51. We applied healing to Babylon, but she wasn't healed. Forsake her, and let us go each to his own country, for her judgment has reached to heaven and towers up to the skies. You see that here in verse 5. And I like this translation. It would be reached. I would even prefer the word like heaped, like it's hit heaven. It's stacked up so high, it's hit the ceiling, right? And so
I want to ask you.
Yes.
Now that idea in verse 4 about come out of her.
Yes.
Because her sins have heaped
Yes.
up. Now, how would you apply that to us today?
Flee immorality, my brethren, right? Flee idolatry. Are not both of these phrases in the New Testament, in various other places? The voice, it's another voice that he hears coming out of heaven from a different direction, apparently, as saying, get away, my people, so that you will not participate in her sins and receive of her plagues. Revelation is unique in its presentation of God's commentary on the earth, but Revelation is not unique in the lessons that it teaches. Not at all. It is in lockstep with the rest of the entire gospel. If you are surrounded by evil, leave. Not in such a way, right, that we can go out of the earth, as Paul pointed out to the Corinthians. But bad company corrupts good morals. Is this not so? Like, remove the evil person from among you. Flee idolatry. Flee immorality. This is not unique to Revelation, and we shouldn't read it in such a way as if it makes it unique to Revelation. God is using the vision to John to reinforce things that are well established in the church. But as humans, we all know we do not do well with being told once. Right? Revelation is like the Deuteronomy of the New Testament. I'm going to tell you this again, and you better listen, because the time has come, and you got to be ready, right? And then in verse 7, Babylon's lack of self-knowledge, this false sense of value. Don't forget that many times there's not a hard distinction between the letters at the beginning to the 7 different churches and the visions that John actually shares with them afterwards. Things that are particularly relevant to Sardis show up in chapter 7, in 16 and 15 and 16. Things that are particular, there's a moment here that's particularly relevant to Laodicea. What did Laodicea get accused of? You think you're doing great, but you're really not. You're in a bad way. That same accusation actually applies to this Babylon. To the degree that she glorified herself and lived sensually, to the same degree give her torment and mourning, for she says in her heart, I sit as queen. I'm not a widow. I'll never see mourning. This obliviousness to the harm of worldliness, this obliviousness to the harm of materialism and evil. And what do humans do? We dress up evil so that when we dress up evil with privilege, and we dress up evil like opportunity, and when we dress up evil like freedom, we convince ourselves that it's okay. But it's never actually okay. It just makes us dumb. Babylon is being dumb. And God's message is to his people who will listen, to he who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches, is got to pay attention here so that you don't go down with the ship. You know, the Titanic is sinking. Get on the lifeboat. Don't go down with the ship.
Hey, Scott, this kind of reminds us of the idea of the sitting as a queen, I am no widow.
Yes.
A lot of these metaphors come from the Old Testament.
They do.
And if you look, say, for example, the life of Jezebel. Okay, Ahab had been killed, and yet she was still, sitting at the top of the political, totem pole.
Yes.
The top of the political ladder. There in Israel, but we know what happened to her. But anyway, I just thought I'd bring that out because
Well, actually,
so much from the Old Testament is right there in the book of Revelation.
as a matter of fact, we're about to read the passage that he's drawing from. I'm with you. Isaiah 47
Very
is what
good.
he's drawing from now. Fall down. Sit in the dirt, O virgin daughter Babylon. Sit on the ground, not on the throne, O daughter of the Babylonians. Indeed, you will no longer be called delicate and pampered. Pick up millstones and grind flour. And what he's talking about as in that image is, and we're in Isaiah. This is not Isaiah class, so I'll keep it brief. But, manual labor, right, is not the purview of princesses, right? When you give your little baby girl her Barbie dollhouse, or you call her a princess and get her a tutu and you give her the little crown, she puts the crown on, and then you say, okay, now go mow the lawn. All right, with your little crown on. That's not how we think about it. Pick up millstones and grind flour. Remove your veil. Strip off your skirt. Expose your legs. Cross the streams. Let your naked body be exposed. Your shame will be on display. I will get revenge. I will not have pity on anyone, says our protector. Isaiah is sharing this prophecy against Babylon with his fellow countrymen, the Israelites, right? The Yahweh Sabaoth is his name, the Holy One of Israel. Sit silently. He's talking to Babylon again. Go to a hiding place, O daughter of the Babylonians. Indeed, you'll no longer be called queen of the kingdoms. I was angry at my people. I defiled my special possession and handed them over to you. You showed them no mercy. You even placed a very heavy burden on old people. You said, I will rule forever as a permanent queen. You didn't think about these things. You didn't consider how it would turn out. And so now, listen to this. Oh, one who lives so lavishly, who lives securely, who says to herself, I'm unique. No one can compare to me. I'll never have to live as a widow. I'll never lose my children. Both of these will come upon you suddenly in one day. You will lose your children and be widowed. You'll be overwhelmed by these tragedies, despite your many incantations and your numerous amulets. You were complacent in your evil deeds. You thought, no one sees me. Your self-possessed wisdom and your knowledge lead you astray. When you say, I'm unique, no one can compare to me, disaster will overtake you. And it keeps on going. But John, the vision that God showed to John, you remember when I was subbing for chapter 15, it was supposed to be 16, but I failed. So chapter 15, we couldn't get through it. We might not get through 18. Most of 15 and 16 are drawn from the life of Moses. Okay? In terms of what John was shown by God, overwhelmingly, pretty much everything out of chapter 15 and 16 is drawn from the life of Moses. Almost everything out of chapters 17 and 18 is drawn from the prophets who prophesied against Babylon. Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. Pretty much everything in these two chapters comes from the ministries of those three men. And so we're going to see that a little more. But yes, God, and this isn't John putting it into these words, right? This is God using John's appreciation of the word to convey to John the nature of the day in which he lives and the times which are shortly to come. So, this is God's language of visual communication that John is taking in. And in verses 10 and 16 and 17, here, woe, woe, the great Babylon, the great city. How's it read? Woe, verse 10. Where? Woe, woe, the great city. Woe, woe, the great city. And in this phrase is repeated in 10 and in 16 and in 19. Verbatim. So what we have here is a series, right? And some translations will do you wrong because they'll make the words different. And it's a repeated thing that John is hearing. And in each of the laments between these three verses, 10 and 16 and 19, the city's fate is said to come upon her in 1 hour. There is a correlation between the Old Testament and the New Testament in the urgency and speed with which the enemy of God's people will fall. Right? This is not the same Babylon, because that Babylon, by the first century, we'll talk about in a minute, but God's enemies, this one and the actual Babylon of the Iron Age too, did not last long once God said, I'm going to handle this now. Verses 12 and 13. Cargoes, the whole cargo list is actually an updated version of Ezekiel 27. So Ezekiel 27 and Ezekiel 28. This was, and here's the thing. Whatever, and I think what it is. But however you want to define the Babylon of Revelation, okay? Whatever the source of the problem is for the church, geopolitically speaking, behaviorally speaking, she is compared to both the old actual Babylon and to Tyre, the Phoenician capital. They are both shoved into the description of Babylon that John knows. Okay? And this is where Tyre starts kicking in. Tyre received two really stinging things from the prophet Ezekiel in the form of funeral songs that he was told to sing over the city of Tyre, which, man, that had to be spooky, right? Somebody comes up to your door and starts singing you a song about your death. It's eerie, right? Well, the two songs, one of them, Tyre is pictured as one of her famous merchant ships that goes off to the sea and cracks and sinks to the bottom of the ocean. And in the second song, you'll remember that the Phoenicians helped build Solomon's temple. In the second song, in Ezekiel 28, Tyre, specifically its king, is pictured as one of the cherubim decorating the temple that actually gets kicked out. So they're kind of funny when you think about them, like saying to one of the cherubim on the walls of Solomon's temple, "You are out of here." But that's what Ezekiel 28 is. And then 27, the first funeral song, is, "You're a ship, and you're going to sink and die, and everybody's going to mourn over all the merchandise that they lost." Here, the list of materials that's actually in Revelation 18 is updated for the mercantile market of the first century. That's why the things are in the list that are in the list. You'll remember that in 17, Babylon is said to sit on many waters. I think you should probably know about this. This thing is called the Tabula Peutingeriana, or the Peutinger tablet, the Peutinger map. It is a highly impractical map. On paper, it's over 20 feet long. It comes from the 4th century, earliest, 4th century AD. But the reason why I love this map, and will eventually pay $250 to get a physical copy of it, is because it actually preserves the Roman transit system as it also would have been in the first century. And if we just move right here to the boot of Italy, boop, this is Rome. She sits on many waters. You can see all the rivers and how the Mediterranean and Aegean encroach upon the city of Rome, and everything that goes on. Like, this whole thing shows the Roman network of life. And what is being portrayed in Revelation 18 is all of this going kaput. And so, verses, let's go here. Man, I'm going to have to hurry. Let's skip on down to verse 17. In 1 hour, such great wealth has been laid waste. Though English translations typically do not reflect it, this actually goes back to Revelation 17, verse 16. In 1 hour, such wealth was made desolate. And I'm really glad you're here, Gary, because this is where chorale becomes important to the interpretation of Revelation, the Freed-Hardeman University chorale. I want to skip down to verses 22 and 23. Let's just read from 21. Then a strong angel took up a stone like a great millstone. God is actually employing his own imagery, right? Jesus is giving John, and the Spirit is giving John this whole vision. And Jesus already gave the parable of the millstone. The one who damages the lives of these little ones, the faith of these little ones, it's better for him to have a millstone tied around his neck and cast into the sea. God is reusing his own material here. Technically, he's reusing it with the prophets too. But yes, Jesus' parable about the millstone is applied here to Babylon. Like a great millstone, and threw it into the sea, saying, so will Babylon, the great city, be thrown down with violence, and will not be found in her any longer. And he starts talking about all these sounds that are disappearing. We used to sing a song in chorale called All That Hath Life and Breath, Praise Ye the Lord. And there's this section of the song, it's a cacophony section, where a soprano just starts singing, and it's words of praise that are going to be layered in, and then all the different parts at different times and in different tones start building up this loud sound of praise to God. This is the opposite. There's this loud, bustling tumult. She sits on many waters. Come here, Italy. She sits on many waters, and the sounds. And you can imagine, how many of you have ever been to Times Square in New York City? Right? That place is loud. What would it be like? How eerie would it be if one by one the sirens disappeared, and then the horns on the taxis stopped, and then the sound of cars moving ceased, and air conditioners running petered out. Hey!
I was going to do that after.
And one sound after another, the whole city just goes quiet and empty and dead. It'd be terrifying, right? That's like Alfred Hitchcock kind of stuff. But this is what John sees declared, is you are going to be Twilight Zone empty. And you're supposed to see that this is why illustrations are great. And this is why Revelation is God illustrating to John. A picture is worth 1,000 words. John knows what it's like to be scared. Revelation is meant to scare John, but not himself. To be scared of the people, to be scared for his audience who need to receive these letters, to be scared for the 7 churches who are going to be receiving this vision. Your world, the worldliness of it, is going to die. And you must live in Christ, in God. Your life is hidden in Christ, right? He who has an ear to hear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. You cannot invest in this world. Are there any questions? All right. You are dismissed. And tell Joel, I went through it. I got through